All right, welcome to Halitics on Friday. It is the free for all, noon Eastern time. I'm going live, and we do start again an hour later than our usual time. Just wanted to get everything as prepared as possible for you so I could do the best possible program for you, one that I hope you find interesting, informative, and possibly even, perhaps, hopefully even entertaining. That's why I do this. I hope you find it's worth your time. Obviously, come back, keep coming back, either live or when you're not live. When I'm not live, but when there's an option to watch anytime you like on YouTube. So I definitely hope you'll, get engaged, get involved, click like, click subscribe. That's the reason I do all of this, is to hopefully make a difference. And the only way I can do that is if more and more of you tune in. Hope you have a great weekend coming up. I am looking forward to it as well. Father's Day should get an opportunity to spend a little extra time with my two sons and my wife as well. Definitely want to include her in Father's Day. Obviously, I wouldn't be a father without her. Cornel West, yes, we have got, I believe, if we are going to make things better, and they're not getting better right now. They just aren't, whether we want them to get better or not. And I think we do, right? I mean, that's, again, why else would I do this if I didn't want to make things better? If that's the goal, I don't see any third option. I don't see any plan C. I think it has to be Cornel West, Dr. West for president. And I am particularly gratified that he is running as a Green Party candidate. I was not thrilled with the People's Party announcement. I do think there are some real issues with that organization, and they are not prepared. They're not ready. Maybe will never be ready. There are concerns about Nick Brana, the founder. There are concerns about their penetration in the 50 states. As far as I know, there's none, or virtually none. They're barely even heard of here in Maryland. And that's one of the stomping grounds for the founder, Nick Brana. So I think Dr. West is making the only sensible choice, and that is to run as a Green Party candidate. Some might say he should be running in the Democratic primary. And frankly, I wouldn't object to that. I truly wouldn't. I would say if he were to run as a Democrat, that's great, but only if he announces in advance. And I don't think there's any sore loser rule. There is a sore loser rule for local. Sore loser rule says if you run in a primary, you can't run on another ticket in the general election. For example, in this county where I live, Montgomery County, we do have what's called the sore loser rule. And I don't think it's a bad name, actually. I don't think it's a pejorative nickname. Yes, but it's okay with me. The rule is if you run either in the Democratic or Republican primaries, or perhaps even in the Green Party, although I don't think that would really become relevant. If you run as a Democrat, for example, and you lose in the primary, you don't get, and that's why it's called the sore loser rule, you're sore that you lost, you don't get to run either as an independent or, frankly, as a Green or a member of another party. If you run as a Democrat, you lose the Democratic primary. You can't run as a Republican if for some reason the Republicans want to nominate you at that late moment. You certainly can't run as a Green. And that is, I think, a sensible rule in general. But since the Democratic Party nationally doesn't have that rule, and if Dr. West were to run as a Democrat, I would want him to announce in advance that he will not run, that he will run as a third party, in a third party. As a Green, he will seek the Green Party nomination if he is if he does not prevail in the Democratic primary. I wonder whether, and I don't know, I should look into this, whether the sore loser rule in Montgomery County would mean that he couldn't be on the Montgomery County ballot if he ran in the Montgomery County primary. My understanding is it would not obtain, because when you vote in primaries in presidential races, you are voting not for the candidate themselves, but for a slate of electors. And then those electors go to the convention, and then they vote for the candidate that they were on the ballot for. And then, of course, the same obtains in the general election. We vote for electors who are tied to a particular candidate, so I don't see that there's any issue there, because West could run his own electors in the Democratic primary, and assuming they don't win, his electors don't have the majority ultimately at the convention, then he can run a different slate of electors, say Green Party electors in the general election. You'd have no duplication of candidates. I strongly support Cornel West. I would like to see him run. I actually would like to see him run the Democratic primary and also run as a Green. I don't see any problem with that, frankly. There's the argument, of course, that if you run as a Democrat, you should accept the will of the Democratic voters. Here's why I reject that argument. And there's two main reasons. The first is our situation's too dire. You know, procedural rules are really important. We should follow them. But there are times when you put procedures aside. And when you're in a situation like the one we're in now, where our planet has become the hottest it's been in many, many thousands, perhaps millions of years, and in very, very short order, when we're perhaps on the verge of World War III, when global poverty rates are such that we probably, almost certainly, have more people worldwide living impoverished lives than ever before, as we're in the sixth great extinction, as we are facing in the United States a calcified political structure where both parties are clearly anti-democratic. They are controlled by a cabal of the billionaire class. And the decisions that they make are only those that are approved by the billionaire class. Given those facts, the situation is too dire for us to just simply accept rules that empower the party leaders. We just cannot do that anymore. We don't have the luxury of doing that anymore. Joan Walsh disagrees with me on all points. She doesn't want Cornel West to run for president as a member of the People's Party. I think this came out before he announced he was running as a Green, but that will not change her argument whatsoever, her position. She doesn't want him running in the Democratic primary even, which is different than some other pundits have a different position than some other pundits have taken, including Jacobin, which says he should run, but only in the Democratic primary, because no one's going to pay any attention to him as a Green, and he would be able to perhaps make some hay in the Democratic primary. That seems patently absurd to me, frankly. If anything, West would help, I believe, Biden, because I think there's a limited number of people who are prepared to vote for a candidate other than Joe Biden in the Democratic primaries. And if you have three candidates now, West, RFK Jr., and Marianne Williamson, I think they're likely to take each other's votes. Now, that said, there could be, and I do want West to run as a Democrat, but only if he announces he will also run if he doesn't get the and run, period. Whether he gets it or not, the Democratic nomination will also run as a Green. The reason that I think, and I'm of two minds, if he ran as a Democrat, would it help Biden? Maybe. Maybe he would have the anti-Biden vote, which is only so large, maybe 40%, maybe 50% of the Democratic primary voters will be anti-Biden. But if those votes are shared among three candidates, then that really does help Biden, obviously, very, very significantly. On the other hand, and I think it could happen, the anti-Biden vote coalesces around West to the point where he's up to 35% in the polls, that could trigger ultimately a landslide away from Joe Biden, which would be beautiful. Which would be beautiful. It would be a beautiful thing. All right, let's get right to it. I'm not going to spend, I'm not going to be short. I'm not going to just spend a brief moment talking about Joan Walsh's piece. It's going to be several minutes, and then we're going to move on to a few other topics. I always want to hear from you, 240-363-7190. I also would love to see your comments in the chat if you aren't prepared to call in. And I do ask you right now, if you haven't yet done so, click subscribe and also click like. All right, so this is about Joan Walsh, and I'm not a big believer in ad hominem attacks. Your past, what you've done in the past, depending on what it is, should or should not impact on your credibility today. But I think we should understand who Joan Walsh is and where she's coming from as we analyze the legitimacy of her arguments, which frankly don't stand up to any scrutiny in any event. But understanding that she has been a long-time neoliberal supporter, let's put it that way, supporter of neoliberal policies and neoliberal candidates, I think definitely calls into question her credibility, but also not only her credibility, but also her integrity, her unbiased nature, her independence, and I think, her progressive credentials altogether. So I first came to be aware of Joan Walsh, who apparently is a pretty well-regarded, or certainly was a long time, very well-regarded pundit on the left, certainly a Democratic pundit, shall we say. And she moved from Salon, where I think she was the editor, in the early 2010s, maybe as early as 2014, 2015, but maybe not till just before the Democratic primaries, which would have been 2015. She was very critical of Bernie. And as you can see, in 2016, early on, January 27th, before the primaries even began, I guess there had been the caucus maybe at that point, maybe not. I'm supporting Hillary Clinton with joy and without apologies. I've come to feel passion for Clinton herself and for the movement that supports her. So, I mean, to me, that's an inexcusable take at that point. Hillary Clinton was clearly less qualified to be president than Bernie Sanders, and her positions were clearly anti-people. She had spent the last 15 years, along with being a U.S. Senator from the state of New York, where she was a unabashed Wall Street sycophant. She had also spent her time traversing the globe promoting fracking. That was her major issue as a member of the Clinton Global Initiative, as one of the principals of the Clinton Global Initiative and the Clinton Foundation. Okay, so let me track back a little bit. That's what she did when she was after she left office, and as First Lady in 2001. But also she did this, followed this as a senator, and also when she was Secretary of State. Obviously, she put aside the Clinton Foundation, Clinton Global Initiative to a degree, but she was a Secretary of State whose actions were simply inexcusable, very, very harmful to our democracy at that point, including the war on Libya, which she championed, which she cajoled Obama to get into, turning that country into a failed state, including her support of a military junta right wing in Honduras, among her many other misdeeds, supporting the multinational fabric manufacturers in Haiti as they fought against a minimum wage increase to 59 cents from 31 cents an hour to 59 cents. And of course, that was harmful to American fabric workers too, because it kept the price of of importing fabric, importing shirts, importing Levi's from Haiti at a level that was just impossible for American manufacturers to meet. So she was in every way pro-war, pro-globalism, anti-worker, and yet Joan Walsh supported her with joy and without apologies. Her both private and public life were incredibly destructive. So this is the person who doesn't like Dr. West, who opposes Cornel West, somebody who has demonstrated either extremely poor judgment or a complete lack of concern for poor, struggling, and working people. Either way, I'm not taking her seriously. I'm not going to give her her opinion the kind of credence I would give somebody who had a better track record. But I'm spending time on Joan Walsh because she does write for The Nation, which has a long and noble history of fighting for poor, struggling, and working people, fighting for the environment. What the ultimate takeaway is that The Nation is no longer your ally. They have some decent columnists. They do cover stories, but they're not your ally. They're not trustworthy. They're publishing somebody whose views are ultimately regressive, are ultimately harmful. Now, I want to make another point here, because I probably will go back to what I discussed a few days ago on this program, how I've been, if you hear the beeping, I apologize, how I've been, I don't know if the right word is doxxed, I don't know what the word is. I posted something on my Facebook page that was interpreted as anti-trans. I don't think it was. I will discuss next week ways in which I could have perhaps used a little bit better and a little bit different phraseology. But I wrote something on my Facebook page, posted something that some people really didn't like. And they urged that I be struck from my administrative capacity in a local progressive group, Our Revolution Maryland. I don't believe that taking a position that they found offensive would justify dismissing me or dismissing the organization if they did not pull my administrative privileges. I think that my administrative privileges are not secondary to what I post on my own personal page. So given that fact, given that I don't think that Our Revolution Maryland should be held responsible for views that I personally don't have a problem. I mean, I post them, so I'm not. But if you did have a problem with my views, I don't think you should hold that against Our Revolution Maryland just because I posted on a personal page. Now, how is that different from Joan Walsh? Because I'm saying, hey, I don't think you should, I think The Nation doesn't deserve the respect it once had because they published Joan Walsh. And yet, I said something that many don't like, and I'm saying you shouldn't hold that against my organization. What's the difference? The difference is I posted on my own personal page. I did not post as a leader of, or as an administrator of, or on behalf of Our Revolution Maryland. I do post there. I post many things there, or Our Revolution Montgomery County. But I post what I believe is consistent with the mission and with the consensus views in the organization. I understood that what I posted on my personal page might or might not meet that test, that standard, and I wasn't going to risk putting the organization in a bad light, at least among some, at least within the position of some activists. That is the opposite of Joan Walsh. Joan Walsh didn't publish something on her personal website or tweet from her, Joan Walsh account. She published an article. The Nation published an article by her in which she supported Hillary Clinton and said, I'm supporting with joy and without apologies. And I get that isn't the Nation's view. The Nation did not endorse Hillary Clinton. But they published a disingenuous article that presented Clinton as some sort of a heroine, somebody that we should all back. And it wasn't by some op-ed writer. It wasn't by a guest commentator. You know, the New York Times got a lot of criticism because they posted something by Senator Tom Cotton, who was writing as Senator Tom Cotton, not as Tom Cotton for the New York Times. Well, Joan Walsh was writing as Joan Walsh, a Nation writer, a Nation contributor, a Nation editor, I believe. So if that's who the Nation is going to retain, I think that calls into very serious question how much they support poor, struggling, and working people. But let's get into the specifics about, again, Walsh's, so she supported Hillary, but now she's against, and she's very much against, Dr. Cornel West. And here's what she has to say about Cornel West and his run, and why, in my view, this is, if anything, an argument to support West. So she says, I loved early DSA leader Cornel West. I loved his book, Race Matters. But there's a little bit of a, I love the author of the book, Race Matters, who's West. I loved everything until he supported spoiler Ralph Nader against then VP Al Gore. And then she goes on to say, a lot of my political friends supported Nader, and a lot have apologized. And she kind of throws in a jab at Michael Moore. I'm not sure he's your friend. I don't think you would call him a friend if you're going to be so snarky about Michael Moore. And then she says something else, which I agree with 100%, 110%. The Iraqi people and the entire globe are so much the worse since Gore was defeated by W with an assist from the Supreme Court and Nader's Green Party. All right, I agree with everything on that page. I really do, at least in the second paragraph. I think Ralph Nader's campaign was a disaster. I opposed it at the time, and I still do. I also think if you did support Ralph Nader, you do have an obligation to acknowledge you made a big mistake. And I wish Cornel West had done that. I think if he had done that, he would have even more credibility. He has a lot of credibility as a critic with solutions to our serious, our existential crisis. And I don't mean existentialist in the French avant-garde way of a internal existentialist crisis. Why do I exist? I mean existentialist crisis as our planet's ability to sustain life is under very serious threat and is, as I speak, being impaired. So, yes, supporting Ralph Nader was a terrible thing. It was wrong. It's inexcusable. Really. I don't excuse you if you supported Ralph Nader, but I would certainly love it if you acknowledged you were wrong. So that's a black mark, I think, against Dr. West. I'll give you that. But again, nobody's perfect. Every candidate has their flaws. And I also think there's a more than a whiff of hypocrisy in this statement by Joan Walsh. Her argument is, well, Cornel West is responsible for W because he backed Nader, and Nader spoiled the election for Gore. And I don't totally reject that argument. I mean, I don't think on his own it's Cornel West's fault, but I do think Nader deserves a significant portion of the blame for W. And W was a torturer. W was a warmonger. W was almost as bad, if not as bad, as Obama when it comes to trade. W was just awful. I mean, there's no possible way. He gutted, the tax cuts for the wealthy were awful. There's simply nothing you can say. He was one of our three worst presidents, along with Nixon and Andrew Jackson. And it was easy to foresee that. There's nothing good to say about George W. Bush's presidency. And if you supported Nader, I think you have, you have to accept some responsibility for that. But if you're going to insist, as Joan Walsh does, that Cornel West owes us all an apology, well, where are you? Where are you on your terrible mistakes, Joan? If you think people have to make a public apology, which I don't totally disagree with, for supporting Ralph Nader, where's your apology for supporting Hillary and giving us George W. Bush? And frankly, I don't think, that was a horrible thing, right? I mean, especially for you to do, because you hate Trump so much and you're such a Trump, despiser. I don't think, frankly, giving us Trump over Hillary was the world's worst. It certainly was nothing nearly as bad. Getting Trump over Hillary, the choice between Trump and Hillary was between bad and worse. The Trump between Gore and W was between good and the worst. But so I'm not going to say that because you supported Hillary over Trump, you did some horrible thing, Joan. I mean, they were both bad choices. Here's the problem. You supported Hillary over Bernie. You spoiled the election for the Democrats because you put in the, and you did a lot, you spent a lot of time and energy, probably more, you probably helped Hillary defeat Bernie and thereby put Trump in the White House. You did a lot more than Cornel West did, Dr. West did in 2000 to put W in the White House. You're responsible for two terrible choices, Joan Walsh, in the 2016 election, Clinton and Trump. And thereby you gave us Trump. Or if you hadn't given us Trump, you would have given us Clinton, which would have been almost as bad. But in the end, you did give us Trump because Bernie would have won. At least according to Nate Silver, he had far higher popularity ratings all the way through. He did consistently better in the head-to-head matchups against Trump. Republican voters, some of whom were perfectly prepared to vote for Bernie, and it makes sense that they would have too, because the Obama to Trump voters were decisive in a number of counties. And those Obama to Trump voters voted for Obama because they thought he would be better for the working class. He might be better on peace than W. And when it turned out that his policies were basically perpetuating endless war, albeit out of Iraq, but into Afghanistan, and his policies were free trade on steroids and bailing out the big banks, they abandoned his proxy in the 2016 race, Clinton. So yes, Bernie would have almost certainly won. And Joan Walsh, you're responsible for that. And yet, as far as I know, you've never apologized for it. In fact, you flat out said when you supported her, you were doing so without apologies. So how dare you, after giving us Trump and taking away Bernie, how dare you scold Dr. West for, as you say, never apologizing? He supported Obama in 2008. So she goes on to the other thing she's upset about. He supported Obama in 2008, which she likes, but then he turned on him quickly. Oh my gosh, how terrible. How terrible that he turned on Obama quickly. When Obama bailed out the big banks, continued the policies that W had started, when Obama did not support even a public option, when he said he would public option in the health care bill, the Obamacare bill, Affordable Care Act. Didn't support that, said he would. How dare Dr. West turn on Obama? Oh no, he supported Jill Stein. Oh my gosh. Well, he actually supported Bernie first. And you, Joan, are the one who gave us Trump. And then I guess now he's gone off the deep end. He praised Ron DeSantis. My gosh, how could he possibly praise Republican? But what did he praise him for? Revolutionary defense of the classics. So this is, again, we're seeing from Walsh is exactly what is wrong, which is bad faith. It's bad faith arguing. It's attacking somebody. I talked about this yesterday. It's attacking somebody because they don't insist that the other side is evil, is themselves. You can't talk to them. That's her argument. Because Dr. West dares to compliment Ron DeSantis for one thing. Now remember, Dr. West is a university professor, and I believe he is a classics professor, as a matter of fact. And for Dr. West to dare praise DeSantis for anything is a betrayal, at least according to Joan Walsh. You cannot speak to these people, at least that's Joan Walsh's view, without only criticizing them, only attacking them, only engaging not in good faith. This is the worst kind of liberal. Joan Walsh says this is the kind of person we should never, ever listen to. In fact, again, if she says it's raining, maybe you go put you wear your shorts and a t-shirt, would be my advice. What exactly did Dr. West say about DeSantis? I don't have the whole article, but I thought this was very interesting. He wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal. Oh my God, again, how dare you write for the Wall Street Journal? He wrote a piece, co-wrote it with another, I believe, a classics professor, and said, hey, here's why I like DeSantis. He's promoting the Western canon, and it shouldn't only be Republicans who do that. It shouldn't only be Republicans who do that. Democrats need to do that too. And that's a pretty brave position, by the way, I think, and we'll see why in a little bit, but I'm going to just clarify. A lot of identity politics folks attack the Western canon, going back to the Greek philosophers, through Chaucer, Dante, Shakespeare. They're often attacked or often criticized as being just dead white men, unresponsive, unconcerned with, perhaps themselves racist. If they're not racist, they're not anti-racist. So how dare we simply rely on these philosophers and poets and writers for our wisdom? And I don't think anyone's saying they're the only people we should rely on, but that there's a tremendous amount of genius, humanity, empathy, brilliant ideas about government that we rely on. And Cornel West is brave. This is kind of the opposite of Write the 1619 Project, where the New York Times attacks everything about the United States as being directly derived from racism and slavery. And that's just clearly not true. I mean, it's certainly a major part of our country, and we need to acknowledge it. We need to discuss it. We need to address how it impacts on us today and how it created our nation, to the extent it was formative. And also just the victims of it, how awful it was. But that's 1619 Project. It's kind of a lodestar among some in the left that we somehow we can't even question, we can't even doubt it. We have to be anti-racist all the time. And that means accepting a view of history that isn't really accurate. Dr. West takes dead aim at that, and I give him a lot of credit for having the bravery to do so and say, no, 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 no. There's so much of value in Socrates and Plato, in Thomas Paine, frankly, even in Thomas Jefferson, and in Shakespeare, and all of these thinkers. So I give Dr. West, it's not saying we excuse the evil of the past, it's saying we acknowledge the debt that we have to Western thinkers. So I give him a lot of credit. If anything, that's a reason to support Dr. West, isn't it? By the way, give me a call, 240-363-7190. 240-363-7190. Let's go through some more of what Joan Walsh doesn't like about West, or why she's criticizing West for his criticism of Obama and his allegedly, I guess, anti-woke, or I mean, it's basically what she's saying is he's not woke, he doesn't get it. So here's some more from Walsh's piece and why she has a problem with his criticisms of Obama. West tried to frame his opposition of Obama as a universalist defense of poor and working class people. And she acknowledges, she's like, yeah, they didn't get enough help from Obama's Wall Street adjacent administration. So she's even accepting. And by the way, Joan Walsh would never acknowledge that Obama had a Wall Street adjacent administration if she didn't have to in this piece to try to gain some credibility. But then she says, calling the president a black mascot of Wall Street oligarchs and a black puppet of corporate plutocrats was awful. Why? Why is that awful? He did do the bidding of the Wall Street oligarchs and the corporate plutocrats, repeatedly did them. Why is this? I mean, this was a Heritage Foundation Affordable Care Act that he pushed. That's what Obamacare was. I don't understand how this is somehow a horrible thing. He is black. I think what West's point there is that we were hoping for an African-American president who was going to center the challenges facing, yes, black Americans, but all poor, struggling, and working class Americans. And I think that's why he got a lot of support from white voters who are now being called racist if they voted for Trump. So it seems perfectly legitimate. West says that Obama was afraid of free black men. Now, West knew Obama, right? I mean, I think he was at Harvard at the same time. I think they had a decent relationship. He knew Obama. So he's telling you something that's based on his personal knowledge. Again, when he says more comfortable with upper middle class white and Jewish men. I think, frankly, and again, I'm now going to, I don't know what the right word is, speculate. I think Dr. West was profoundly disappointed by Barack Obama. I think he was hoping for so much more, and he didn't get it. And I think he was maybe even heartbroken to a degree by what Dr. West did. And that's why I think you see that criticism. So I don't know how else to respond, but that this is certainly no reason not to support Dr. Cornel West for president. Okay, just a little more on this. We're going to go until 1. Walsh just can't stop bashing West. And for him to, in her view, challenge Joe Biden is the biggest crime. He brings nothing except legitimate complaints. No plan for achievable change, she claims. Well, obviously the plan is to get elected, right? If he's the president, he can certainly make achievable change. So I think that's just the dumbest comment for her to make. There's no plan for achievable change without him running. Then there would be no plan. He's running to make the change. And he is talking about very specifics about ending poverty, whether it's universal health care, whether it's ending the wars and ecological collapse, stopping the Ukraine funding. He's clearly, he has a plan. He has an agenda. She's just wrong. And she's carrying water for neoliberal elites. The nation needs to let her go. She doesn't, and she doesn't even give him the bone to say, well, at least if he ran as a Democrat, that would be okay. She doesn't want any challenges. Even if we were run as a Democrat, he would hurt Biden. He loves a classics-only curriculum, which is traditionally left out teaching about other cultures as well as the Western world's racial sins. Well, we talked about that. I don't know, how does that hurt Biden? Most Democrats want anyone but Biden. I just want to respond one more point, one more area where she is so clearly harming, her, in my view, her own cause. This argument about West, somehow his classics only argument is anti-black, because in the past, the classics have excluded African Americans. Here's something else the same two writers put in the Washington Post 3 years ago. The emancipation movement was in fact stoked by the classics. Frederick Douglass, when he learned to read, read Socrates. He read the dead white males. He read the philosophers. Dr. King's civil rights movement was, in West's words, galvanized by classics, including 3 mentions of Socrates in his classic letter from Birmingham jail. The point is that those classics that Walsh mocks, hoping to get some traction among some identitarian politics, some identitarian activists, have been used to liberate people. They are part, in fact, the ideals undergirding them are part and parcel of the liberation movement. At last, let me move on, because we're talking, one more thing from Walsh. I had one more slide here and then I want to move on. So Walsh tries to, acknowledge that maybe there's some legitimate argument for Dr. West. She brings up Nina Turner. She says, well, Nina Turner supports West. Well, she doesn't really. She just supports his right. And I thought this was I was surprised to read that, because Senator Nina has not been has not been willing in the recent past, to challenge the Democratic Party. All she says is he should run for president. She doesn't say she'll support him if he runs. She doesn't say she supports his candidacy. She doesn't say we have to vote for someone other than Joe Biden. But why should we? Why should we reject the counsel of our good friend, Joan Walsh? Why is it so bad? Why is her advice so wrong-headed, so misguided? Because, as I said earlier, the challenges we face, in part because of this president, are existential in nature. We are really facing potential. I mean, we are right now in cataclysmic climate crisis. And Joe Biden is as bad as Trump on this issue. The Biden administration approved 6430 permits for oil and gas drilling in its first 2 years. And this doesn't even include, this was Dateline 1/24/23. This doesn't even include Willow Creek and Mountain Valley Pipeline, which were both approved in 2023. 2 massive carbon bombs. We must do better. We must do better than Joe Biden, or it's all over. And this is not some theoretical concern. This is not some, maybe, Hal, you're being a little bit of an alarmist. 2023 June, hottest ever. Let me get you that date, because I was like, where does it say 2023? I want you to see that I am using very current information. June has hottest start on record. And remember, 2015 through 2022 were the hottest 8 years on record. Now we've got the hottest June. We're looking at probably the hottest year ever, 2023, meaning we'll have had 9 consecutive years that are the 9 hottest years on record. And not only are we over every other June, we're also the first month ever over 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is kind of the point of no return according to the Paris climate talks and the agreement that was broached there. It's way too late. But to the extent we can still salvage some things of beauty and wilderness, we have to vote for Dr. Cornel West. We have to support him. We have to leave the Democratic Party. It's not just the climate crisis either. Something closely related, endless war. The Pentagon is a major, it's not the most significant factor. It's not the most significant driver of the climate catastrophe, but it's up there. The biggest driver is the transportation sector, which is why I made the argument back in 2016, but also in 2020, that it wasn't absolutely clear to me that Trump was worse for the environment than Hillary. Because if we recognize the biggest challenge we face in the environment is the climate catastrophe, and I think it is, then Trump's at least, talk about no more free trade, and to a degree he did in fact champion tariffs, some tariffs, not enough, and not in a very consistent way. But nevertheless, reducing international trade is critical to addressing the climate catastrophe. And Trump was an enemy, or at least he said he was, campaigned as an enemy of, and to a degree, although admittedly he was a hypocrite, to a degree governed in a way that was not as pro-free trade as the Democrats have been. All right, it's not just the climate catastrophe. It's also endless war. That is a reason that we must support Dr. West. After 9/11, the U.S. decided the Taliban was as culpable as the Qaeda terrorists who struck America, and we then spent 20 years trying to keep the Taliban entirely out of power. Obviously, it was a complete disaster. The Taliban is now in complete control of Afghanistan. Joe Biden is certainly one of the most responsible people for that fact. Biden, I want to be fair to Biden, so I always try to be fair. He did support the war on Iraq, which did lead ultimately to our full-throated invasion of Afghanistan. But, as I understand it, Biden opposed Obama's pivot to Afghanistan. And Biden did get us out of Afghanistan. So I'm going to say this. I give Biden a bit of a pass on this aspect of the argument against Democrats. It was much more Clinton and Obama who were responsible during the Clinton administration for the terrible policies in the Middle East, including, of course, Libya, Iraq, and Afghanistan. But Biden has to be responsible for the policy he's pursuing now, which is completely, which reflects a failure, an utter failure to learn the lesson of the past, which is that we shouldn't be pursuing adventures, military adventures overseas. That is the lesson, I think, except with very few, you never say never, but with very few exceptions, we should not be pursuing military adventures overseas. We just shouldn't be doing that. It's just too devastating, too expensive, and so often leads to terrible, terrible outcomes, like what happened in Afghanistan, where we let the New York Times, the Washington Post, George W. Bush and Barack Obama persuade us that we had to make war with Afghanistan. So what's another bogus story that Stephen Wertheim of the New York Times is telling us we need to reject? That the war in Ukraine is solely due to the evil, aggressive, and imperialistic drive of Russia and Putin. And our policies had nothing to do with it. That's another story that we're telling ourselves. It's a false story. And because it's false, and because we're pursuing a war based on it, which is devastating for the people in Ukraine and devastating for Eastern Europe and incredibly costly, we need a change. We need someone else in government at the top, in the White House. And the only candidate, well, RFK Jr., yes. But besides him, and he is in many ways really, not a serious candidate, not so much because he hasn't held office, although I think that's important. It doesn't decide the issue for me because Cornel West hasn't either. And Biden is that bad. But there's support for crypto, the recent climate skepticism that he's expressed. No, he's not somebody we can vote for. Even, I agree, the dogmatism on the anti-vaxxer front is a problem. It's a serious problem. So we do need a change. We need someone besides Joe Biden. We need to get out of Ukraine. We need to stop funding death, destruction. And as Wertheim says, our view may well be that it's all Russia's fault. But that's not what future historians will conclude. They will recognize that even if you call Putin a tyrant, they don't act in a vacuum. That invading Ukraine, and I thought this too, by the way, at the time, this was a major step for Putin to take. Some are arguing, well, and I read this response, he didn't think it was going to be a challenge, right? He thought that Ukraine would be a pushover. I'm not so sure. It is a big country. It's relatively prosperous. They do have an army. I think he recognized he was perhaps stepping into a hornet's nest, but was willing to do it because of his concerns that ultimately Ukraine would be a NATO state right on his border, with an enormous border. And Wertheim points out that if you just say the only reason this happened is because of Putin's bad faith, because he's a bad person, we are making a fundamental error. We're ascribing his behavior and the behavior of the Russians to their essential nature and not the situations they face. And you know what? Even with very few exceptions, maybe some maniacs act based just solely on what's inside them. But most of us, even people that we have hold in very low esteem, make decisions based on their environment. And Putin was facing an environment that he had repeatedly said, and the Russians had repeatedly said, and other Russians had repeatedly said was bad. It was not an environment they wanted. They don't want a NATO country which the West will have sworn to defend in all circumstances, and which might well be bellicose. He didn't want them on his doorstep, and I think that's reasonable. We don't want Cuba as a Russian puppet or proxy or beard on our doorstep either, and with good reason, understandably so. Perhaps with less good reason, though, because Russia is a far weaker country than the United States and is not nearly as well able to defend itself as we are, as we have clearly seen. So we made a terrible mistake when we said, and I think we did it for, greed. It was American corporations, multinational corporations, Western corporations that wanted us to keep making NATO bigger, sell more arms, right? You sell more weapons. And this actually heightened Ukraine's vulnerability. We kept pushing NATO to be the vehicle. And this was wrong. This was a terrible thing to do, and we shouldn't have done it. And the result has been disastrous. It's war. It's endless war. It's death and destruction. There's no end in sight. We need an alternative. We need somebody else in the White House besides Joe Biden. All right. That'll do it. I did have a couple clips, but you know what? It's after 1 on the East Coast. Have a great weekend, and maybe we'll get to some of those clips next week. Looking forward to speaking to you then. I'll make an announcement whether I'll be on Monday. It is a holiday. It's Juneteenth, and depending on my situation, I may or may not be able to do a live stream Monday. But if I don't do it Monday, I'll be back Tuesday. Have a great weekend.